Right. We should be going live. With any luck. There was an ad. Okay, we should be up. Let's hope it doesn't kill itself before we start. High CPU usage detected. Please, Microsoft. Hmm. Yeah, 70% isn't terrible. Hello, everyone. My CPU usage is apparently quite high, according to XSplit. Okay, we'll be starting in just a few minutes. We're waiting for the stragglers to tune in, and we'll get going. Yeah, look at that. Wow. You're hiding all your sweet merch. That's usually how focus works, actually.
They say they can't hear me.
They can now.
Can you all hear me now?
Mm-hmm. They can hear you now. Yeah, he was shouting about his blowback. Oh, by the way, Dan, I have a parcel coming which I might have to jump up and get during the podcast. So
you have what coming?
A parcel.
Oh, parcel. Okay.
A package. What do you call them? Packages there?
Sure. I just froze on a mixer. I don't know why. What was I going to say? Yeah, luckily I was muted because I had a really horrible racist tirade that I went on. You'll never know now. I'm just kidding.
He was talking about the blurred background.
I was talking about how I don't like my face.
That too. Oh, should we talk about Galaxy Fold? That's probably something we should mention, right?
Oh, sure.
We can do it at the end if we have time, because we might not, because I have to go immediately. Oh, yeah, by the way, guys, there will be no Q&A after the show today, because I have to shoot off, and Dan doesn't know how to host a podcast on his own, so...
I can't be bothered. I'm the talent.
That reminds me, let me make sure that I can switch to you when I have to run to get the door. Yeah, I can. Nice. No QA, I'm leaving. Oh, I'm sorry. We'll have another... will you be back by next Friday, Dan?
Yes. Yeah, I come back Tuesday evening.
Mm-hmm.
This is the shortest trip I'm taking. It's also like one of the longest.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because I was out in Hawaii for Qualcomm even longer than I'm going for a World Congress. I fly out tomorrow afternoon, arrive Sunday morning, do the Microsoft presser in the evening. Mm-hmm. Got some stuff on Monday, fly out Tuesday. Not feeling that deep blur. Yeah, it's a little too much blur, right? I almost wish it was like you can kind of control it a little bit. I could turn it off. Actually, I could probably keep it on just so others can see it.
Yeah. All right, well, I'm ready to go when you are.
Yeah, let's start it up. And,
I am now recording.
Oh, I'm not recording. I'm sending out the tweet.
Oh, I'll delete that then, shall
I? Okay, I am now recording.
I am now recording.
And, I got to turn off my volume on this thing. Hold on a sec, sorry.
Should we just start the recording again?
Yeah.
Okay. Ready?
All right, now I'm recording.
Okay, I am now recording.
3, 2, 1. That wasn't a very loud clap for me, but let's try again. 3, 2, 1. I missed my hand. Welcome to the Windows Central Podcast, episode 123 for February 22nd, 2019. Hey everyone, Dan Rubino here, joined by Zach Bowden for another exciting episode of the Windows Central Podcast. And this week, well, it's going to be a little bit of a shorter podcast because I'm going to be traveling. Zach's got plans, and there wasn't that much news this week, although there was some big news that Zach broke, including Santorini, which are some islands near Greece or something. But it also relates to Windows in a very specific way, which we'll talk about and divulge during this podcast. Let's talk about timeline for Chrome, which is now available if you're using a Chrome browser, which is kind of nice. I also have to talk a little bit about what we presume to be HoloLens 2, which should be announced on February 24th, which means if you're listening to this recorded, you probably already know that there's a HoloLens 2. So you can see what we got right, what we got wrong in our predictions and estimates of what we're expecting. And yeah, we'll probably talk about some other things. Oh, I also did an MSI laptop review, which I'll quickly mention as well. Zach, how are you doing on this fine Friday?
I'm not too bad. How's your blurred background you've got there?
Yeah, so if you guys are listening to this audio, you won't see, but if you head to mixer.com/Windows Central, you can see the pre-record of this or the re-recording of this podcast. You can see I'm using the Skype blurred background feature, which I kind of forgot existed. It's rolled out now, I think, to everybody. I'm on a production machine here at Surface Studio 2. And so you can actually check it out and see if it works. It's effective. I mean, it works well. Zach and I were joking around, though, how this does focus all your attention on my face, and I find that makes me uncomfortable. But I'd rather have you see the background stuff. But yeah, it's pretty effective if you have a messy back area or you want to hide what's going on back there. So amazing technology. This is machine learning. In real-time action, right? This is...
You should be able to change it from a blur to like something solid, like a green screen.
I think that would probably look worse. Probably. I mean, there's definitely, because when I move quickly, you can see it shows the background. It takes a second to catch up. But yeah, it's pretty impressive technology. I mean, it's funny because this stuff we're used to being on cameras and doing still photos, but this is like live streaming. I don't know. It's just it's pretty amazing. It'll get better. I wish there were a way to control the blur. It's on or off in terms of how blurry things are, but seems effective. Let me know what you think. You can turn it on. If you're on a video call, you can just go into your settings and there's a little toggle. You can turn it on and try it yourself. So give it a go. Anyway, let's talk a lot about this Santorini stuff. So you broke this story this week. Now, Santorini isn't new technically, just a new name for what we've been talking about for a while. So why don't you explain everything about what this is?
Right, so Santorini is a codename I stumbled across a couple of weeks ago now, and it turns out it's the codename Microsoft is using for Windows Lite. Turns out the Lite wasn't the correct codename we were using. That was just something they referred to it as. But Santorini is the codename for the Windows Lite experience we've been talking about for quite a few weeks now. It's the sort of lightweight Chrome OS competitor that Microsoft is working on internally, and it's coming along quite nicely internally. I've seen some updated bits and pieces as of late, and it's looking quite good. Still can't show it to you, unfortunately, because Microsoft will get very upset. But I can talk a bit about it, I think, because that's easier to do. So Santorini, it's the version of Windows Core OS. It is a version of Windows Core OS that, excuse me, uses C Shell and all of this other good stuff. And it's also the version of Windows Core OS that you're going to see running on more traditional form factors like laptops and two-in-ones, and upcoming foldable devices that run Windows, because obviously this week the Galaxy Fold was announced, and that's sort of kickstarting the foldable device category, if you will. And Microsoft does want to be there. It will have foldable PCs, so will third-party OEMs. This essentially replaces Polaris as well, because I know a lot of people have been asking me about Polaris and Andromeda OS. Andromeda OS and Polaris the movement on that front internally has basically stopped ever since Santorini sort of came to be internally. That it's essentially replacing that. To clarify, because I've seen a lot of people get confused about this on Twitter, Santorini is not Windows Core OS. Santorini is built on top of Windows Core OS. Just like Polaris was, or Andromeda was, or Oasis is, and what's the other one? Aruba. Oasis, for those who don't know, is the version of Windows Core OS for HoloLens 2, and Aruba is the version of Windows Core OS for Surface Hub 2X, which we've already seen. So next week we should see Windows Core OS for HoloLens 2, and then hopefully at Build we'll see Santorini, which is Windows Core OS for laptops and foldable PCs.
So to explain, so there's these things called composers. Mm-hmm. And those are also the shells?
Yeah, the composers basically. I like to think of the composers as experiences, as the experience you have when you use that version of Windows Core OS. So, for example, the Windows Light composer, the Santorini composer, has a centered taskbar, a centered start button, a very simplified start menu that boots into a much more advanced start screen, if you will. I say screen, like it's a start web page in Edge, but it's tied natively into the operating system, so
it kind of looks like a default Android. Like
it does,
right?
Chrome OS. If you use like the older versions of Chrome OS of that simple app launcher it had, it looks a lot like that, and that's not an accident. That's deliberate. Microsoft understands Chrome OS has its advantages, and Microsoft wants to sort of take advantage of those advantages as well. Santorini is Microsoft's lightweight version of Windows. It's not a lesser version of Windows. It's a new take on what Windows can be, and this is very important because I think this is why they've sort of stopped using the light phrase internally quite a bit and have started focusing more on the Santorini codename, because calling it light makes people think, oh, this is just going to be a worse version of Windows. That's not what this is trying to be. This is trying to be a new version of Windows, a different take on what a Windows product can be. And I think that's very important for this, which is why I don't think they should call it Windows. Anyway, we've talked about that before. Anywho, so the Santorini stuff is like, that's one specific composer. But within Santorini, there's different flavors or tailored experiences that sit under the Santorini codename. So you have Centaurus, which is Santorini for foldable PCs. Obviously, the shell has to adapt and change to fit on these different form factors. You can't have one sort of shell experience because, you know, some buttons may get in the place of, like, say, if you were using a dual screen device, maybe there's a centered button. That no longer makes sense there because the screen has a hinge down the middle of it, so the start button would have to move, as would some other elements and so on. And on a tablet, for example, the apps would make more sense running in full screen mode than they would be running in windowed mode, so those different experiences change as well. So we've got Centaurus, which is the sort of tablet foldable thing. We have Pegasus, which is the sort of traditional laptop two-in-one experience. And I think Light-Andromeda is one as well, and this is only because the movement on Andromeda OS's original OS is dead, more or less, and they've just been working to get Windows Lite running on it instead. I think is what's happening
and
there.
We think that's because, and we talked about this on the last podcast, that Andromeda looked a little too much like Windows 10 mobile.
Well, I think this is very funny. Polaris and Andromeda OS were basically Microsoft's attempt. This was back when Terry Myerson was in charge. This was Microsoft's attempt at trying to get Windows to look like Windows. Windows Core OS to look like legacy Windows. You had Andromeda OS, which was Windows 10 Mobile, more or less, but just updated with this newer universal base. And then you had Polaris, which just looked like Windows 10 Desktop, except it was using C Shell and was entirely modern and stripped out the Win32 stuff. Those ideas are gone. You're not going to see Windows Core OS that looks like Windows 10 Legacy Desktop. I think what Microsoft is doing is they're putting Legacy Desktop into a bubble and going, this is Legacy Windows. We know what it looks like. We know what it feels like. This isn't going to change much from here on out. Windows Core OS, on the other hand, this is our new platform. This is where we can branch out, try new things, innovate, and evolve.
It really take the ideas behind the Fluent design system. Because right now, with the problem with Fluent design is it's not the problem. It's just that they're making Windows 10 more fluenty as we joke around with each release. But going through the shell and updating it and adding blur and doing all this, it takes time because the OS itself and parts of the shell are like 20 years old. And so being able to redo that is going to be hard. And there's only so much you can do. However, if you can start fresh with a brand new shell and base it all on everything that's behind the Fluent design system and really show that off, it looks way cooler, more modern, it's lighter, it's fresher. It's just going to be really, and not this weird sort of hybrid situation we have right now in Windows 10.
That's the beauty of Windows Core OS, right? It's a universal version of Windows that's built from the ground up as a modern platform. It doesn't really include...
So it's an extension sort of what we know as one core, right?
Right, yeah. I think it still has one core involved with it. It doesn't replace one core. One core is on top of it as well. But essentially... This isn't a technically accurate description of what I'm about to say, but this is sort of how it's been dumbed down to me. And I realize if you're a developer listening to this will make no sense to you, but to everyone else who isn't a developer, this might make a bit more sense. So Windows 10 Legacy is Windows 10. It's Windows 10 on the service. Microsoft has been building all the modern stuff on top of legacy Windows, and legacy Windows includes things like the support for the Windows 95 File Explorer, all that legacy stuff, the control panel, those super old context menus and icons that you can find within your operating system. The new Windows 10 stuff has just been built on top of that, and Microsoft has continued to build on top and on top and on top. The core of Windows Legacy is still Win32, but UWP sits on top as sort of like an extension to the operating system. What Windows Core OS does is switches those around sort of in a weird way. So the UWP becomes the core of the operating system, which is much lighter, much faster, and Win32 becomes the extension that you can plug in on top. So not all devices will have to have Win32, but if you are using one of those devices where you need to run a program from the Microsoft Store that is a Win32 program, you can have that version, that extension that you plug into Windows Core OS. Then that gives you the native support to run those legacy programs. That's kind of how it works. So it swaps the Win32 stuff being the core of the operating system with the UWP. Now, again, that's not an technically accurate description. I realize that, but that's kind of how it made sense to me by describing it like that. And I think that's how a lot more people understand it as well. It's a modern, lightweight version of Windows. Windows Core OS is the core of Windows. It strips out all of those legacy components, turns lots of things into modular components that you can plug into the operating system and builds from there. Microsoft can have a universal base, can say, oh, there's a foldable device there, there's a phone there, and there's a fully fledged desktop there. We can build 3 different experiences using the same base without having to start from scratch every single time. That's basically the point.
It almost kind of reminds me, and this is really going back to the Windows CE days. So that's what Windows CE was. It had a kernel to it, it had a base layer to it, but then the UI could be adapted and created. And this was the foundation of what we knew back in the day as Windows Mobile. And it eventually became Windows Phone 7. And that also became the downfall of Windows Phone 7. It was its strength, but Windows CE itself as a core and as a base didn't have all the stuff that was modern and future facing. So Windows Phone 7 didn't have a very good Bluetooth stack, for instance, because Windows CE didn't have a very good Bluetooth stack. But the whole idea behind Windows CE was, sure, we used it in Windows Mobile and it had this cool UI that looked like Windows 95. But Windows CE was also used in things like ATMs and kiosks and weird kind of machines and things that scanners that companies would use to scan products in a factory. And like Windows CE powered all sorts of things. And sometimes it looked like Windows Mobile, but other times it didn't. But that was the foundation of Windows CE. But Windows CE eventually, like I said, it was already pretty old. But it seems like they're kind of they want this idea of a modular operating system. But Windows 10, which is built on, of course, the legacy of XP and 7 and Vista and all this kind of stuff, is too massive to, like, they can do some modular stuff to it. But even we see something like Edge wasn't ever to be completely modularized and separated so it could get store updates. What we are seeing, or it sounds like at least with Windows Core OS, is this is the final goal of having a truly modular system where you have one core, you have these different UIs and shells that can go on top. And as you said, it adjusts to not only to different existing devices, 2-in-1s, foldables, which are now coming out, traditional desktops, but also future devices that really haven't been invented yet, including, and then there's also HoloLens, which is going to be a big one as well. So it's this idea of like future computing models, which is really kind of this future right now. We're getting away from classic x86 desktop situations. That will always exist. Legacy hospitals, institutions, people who need powerful computing, which will also be going towards quantum, I should mention. That will still exist. But these ideas of like future computing models is, I think, really, something we've been talking about for a very long time that Microsoft is really trying to go after. I guess all we can say is we hope to hear more at Build. So Are you still hearing that we're going to hear more at Build?
So regarding timeline, obviously timeline is always in flux. Internal plans always change. But this is what I'm hearing right now. Santorini is on track for an official release, like an actual shipping version, next year, sometime in 2020, which kind of lines up with what we've been hearing in regards to Service Hub 2X as well. I wouldn't be surprised if the same thing happened with HoloLens 2. We'll see about HoloLens 2 next week, of course, but maybe that was further ahead than the other flavors of Windows Core OS. Anyway, so official release for Santorini is sort of targeted for sometime in 2020, but that doesn't mean we won't hear about it soon. Microsoft does want to start previewing this stuff to the public sooner rather than later, and has currently pegged an announcement for this stuff at Build. Now, I'm not sure if that means we'll actually get preview bits at Build, or if they're just going to say, hey, here's what we're working on, you'll have bits to test later this year. I have heard whispers that there may be a device that they give out at Build, which would suggest that they will be giving preview bits out of Windows Lite at the same time, around but we'll have to see. But yeah, a build is looking very likely for an announcement of this stuff, and if we're lucky, we may also get bits and even hardware to play with as well. I don't think it'll be a foldable device. I think it will just be a Pegasus device, which makes sense. The foldable stuff will be coming at a later date. In regards talking about later date things, the Win32 stuff. Now, I've seen many people who write about this stuff report that Windows Lite or Santorini or Windows Core OS will not be able to run these Win32 programs. And originally that was the case. When Terry Myerson was doing Windows Core OS, it wasn't going to be able to run Win32 programs at all, really. Or at least not natively. It was going to do it through like remote emulation and stuff. That's changed. Microsoft is actually working on a layer, like a containerized layer, which I think is codenamed Win32U, and it stands for Win32 User Mode, where the Win32 sort of bits that you need to run those legacy programs runs in something called a user mode that you plug into the top of Windows Core OS, and then it gives you access to those legacy components. And Windows Lite will be one of those platforms where that can be taken advantage of. Now, I'm not sure if you'll be able to download just any old .exe from the web. I'm doubting it, but any program in the Microsoft Store, including Win32 one, should run on Windows Lite at some point. I don't know if it'll be there on day one. It probably won't be. But it's definitely something they're working on, which is something...
and we're also not even sure when day one is.
Right.
So maybe
it could be day one next year. You know, it's like we have to see. But which is something I mentioned in the last week's podcast when I said HoloLens 2 might have Win32 support. This is that same thing, Win32U. They're working on that layer that they can plug into these Windows Core OS devices that then gives them access to these legacy program support, which is, I think, very interesting. And it opens the door to for Santorini to a lot more people, I think. I think when we were first writing about Windows Lite and the idea of it being a UWP, PWA only platform, lots of people were turned off by the idea. But being able to run those Win32 programs when you need it as well, I think opens the door to a lot more people. And Microsoft understands that they can't escape Win32. There's no point trying. So they're going to bring it along for the ride. And while it will no longer be the primary platform for app development, it will still be supported for those of the people who need it. Because not everyone needs it. The whole point of Windows Lite, or I keep calling it Windows Lite, Santorini, is it's a version of Windows for light computing. It's for people who don't.
In fact, it's so light. Didn't you hear something about how quickly you can update versus how Windows currently? So everybody who is listening to this right now knows about Windows 10, and you got a system update, and it downloads it, and it's gotten better, right? They've done a lot of work on the back, and it has made the experience smoother. For instance, it downloads in the background. It doesn't use a lot of CPU resources. If you're doing something, there are now active times, and then it reboots and it preloads stuff like so. It's definitely better, but it's still not as good as like your smartphone or how Chrome OS works. So how does Santorini handle OS updates?
Santorini, and in extension, all of Windows Core OS, any flavor. Microsoft had an all-hands meeting internally recently. I don't know when exactly. I heard about this a bit later. But in it, they started talking a little bit more openly about Windows Core OS and its plans for that. They showed off HoloLens 2 with Windows Core OS and sort of talked a little bit about the OS there. Again, this is all internal stuff. This wasn't public. And they also showcased a Windows Core OS device that was able to install updates in under 1 minute, which is a huge deal, apparently. This is related to something called state separation, I think, which I don't think is a new thing. I don't think it's specific to Microsoft. I think Android has state separation or something similar to it as well, where what it does is you're running on your phone, there's two partitions of the operating system. You have the live partition, which is what you're using, and then you have an offline partition, which essentially mirrors everything that's going on in the live partition. What happens is when there's an update ready to download and install, it downloads and installs that to the second offline partition, so that when it's all done and installed, your phone says, hey, time to restart. And what it's actually doing is just restarting you into the other partition where that update has already been installing for the last 25 minutes. That's the same thing that they're doing with Windows Core OS. The update will be made available in Windows Update. It will download and install to an offline partition. Then when Windows says, hey, it's time to install an update, you click restart. And instead of having to apply the update 10%, 20%, 30%, it'll just boot into that second partition and you'll be good to go. Just like a normal reboot. There'll be no processing it. There'll be no please wait, ... setting up. It will just go straight into that partition, which is a huge deal. Microsoft is very impressed and pleased with the work they've done here. I think that should solve the Windows Update problem for a lot of people. I don't know if that will ever come to Windows 10 Desktop. I doubt it, but who knows? They might do one day.
So that sounds very interesting. Yeah, I think this whole idea is just going to be really interesting. We have to see it in action, but I think this is the promise of a modular operating system. And we shouldn't we should also mention UWP here. I mean, you have mentioned that this is basically a UWP operating system, which is why you and I always chuckle when people say UWP is dead. It's like, sorry, everything like HoloLens and all their future computing systems that they're building out is kind of based around the idea of a UWP framework that may include Centennial apps as well, and PWAs and Electron, but that's all underneath UWP, which gets wrapped for the store with APIs to interact with those types of systems. But UWP is like sort of really interesting here because, despite the flaws in UWP, or, there's not a lot of phone apps anymore, which was a model people questioned back in the day, right? So we had Windows Phone, and then you had Windows 8, and then Windows 10 eventually, and you could run like phone apps on your PC. And it turned out some of those apps were gimped, and they didn't always make sense, right? If you think about what we use phone apps for, it's very different actually behind a laptop. Like the idea that you're going to necessarily fire up a Yelp app or Instagram, although you can do Instagram on Windows 10, or Snapchat, or sort of phone-focused applications on a PC makes a little bit less sense. And this is the issue, Chrome OS is going to face. I always hear people talk about, well, Chrome OS can run Android apps. It's awesome. It's like, it's actually not that awesome. First of all,
it's not, yeah.
Android apps, yeah, they run, but they don't always make sense. I have a Chromebook, and I'm not finding myself going to the store a lot of times installing phone apps on my laptop-like device. And so the other benefit of UWP is that the app scaling. This is so important. This is something that iOS still lacks. Like iOS scales nicely on iPads, really well actually, but not totally. For instance, Instagram still runs sideways on an iPad. So what's interesting about the iPad was it originally started off as this sort of like vertical held book thing, but then they like, oh, Surface is out there, so now you can attach a keyboard and it looks like a Surface. But when you go into that orientation, some apps don't rotate. So Instagram still runs sideways. And it's really weird that Instagram, such a massive player on iOS, is still like, yeah, iPad. They don't really optimize their apps. Even Skype, I don't think, is optimized for the iPad. And part of it's just to do with that system. And now the rumor is, of course, that iOS apps are going to kind of merge with Mac OS apps, and they're going to run those on laptops. And you're going to run into the same issue that basically we went through with Windows 8, which is how awesome is it running phone apps onto a desktop or laptop system. It's cool, but it's not great. I think iOS, though, as an operating system and a developer program, is better than Android. I'm not sure it's as advanced as UWP in terms of this app scaling stuff, which I think is super important. The idea that these apps are so much more flexible. And there was actually a big update recently to UWP for the developer tools, which was announced, and we'll hear more about this at Build. But UWP is still an amazing framework. I'm updating my HoloLens right now, and it's just cool running UWP apps still on there. It's really the future of their mobile computing, and that's because Win32 doesn't have a future. It can't run on these light computing devices. So what else is there? Well, UWP's Microsoft's answer. That's why if they got rid of it, it doesn't make sense, because it's like everything we're talking about with Santorini and everything. Like, what would it actually run? Like, if it's not running UWP.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. It's like there's no other. Microsoft has to do UWP because there's no other way about it. Otherwise, they give up at that point. It's dead. Windows is dead if they just stick with Win32, right, which is unfortunate but true. But yeah,
and that's not saying UWP doesn't need improvements. It does, and it will be. But it's turning into it's a long-term play for Microsoft here. I don't know. I still love to hear from developers, by the way, on UWP and what they feel about it.
I mean, every single Windows 10 update has new UWP APIs. It's not like they've halted development on the platform. They continue to build it out. And we've talked about this before. I think the plan for UWP is the long game. It's just over time it's going to improve and evolve and adapt and become bigger and more capable for developers just over time. It can't all be there on day one. Win32 wasn't all there on day one.
And the Centennial stuff is, I think, gotten a lot stronger too. So we talked about this in the past, how Centennial, the idea of taking Win32 apps, putting them to the store, it's not a one-off thing. Like you could just do it. They have to go through and create all the APIs for those Win32 apps to interface with UWP and the store and the Windows 10 system. And that's an ongoing process. Hopefully we'll hear more about it at Build. But that's why, but we're seeing more and more. I just tweeted out last night how HP's, what do they call it, support Center. It's a little app. It's on Elite Books and their business stuff. And you launch it. Dell has something similar, and it checks for firmware updates and driver updates direct from HP. It also does like a check system and has your warranty info. Like that's a Win32 app that exists in the taskbar, and it comes pre-installed. That's now in the store. And I've seen every manufacturer do this now. Dell's got a bunch of their stuff, including their graphics tuning utility for displays is now in the store. This is on the fast ring. I tweeted out, including the store link if you're interested. But what we're seeing is all the OEMs are now starting to put all their proprietary software stuff into the store. And that's awesome, right? That's UWP in action. That wasn't able to be done months ago or a year ago. It's because of these new tools and APIs and abilities that Microsoft's been creating for these companies that we're getting that. So I don't know. It's an exciting story. I like to say we were right, but we still have to see how all this stuff works and it's well received and all that. But what Zach shared some stuff before the podcast here, some internal stuff. The way that they're making it sound like this is what we've been arguing for, this idea of future light computing, a new system based on a fluent design. It doesn't look like Windows 10. You're not going to confuse it. It'll be on new devices and hardware. That's going to be really exciting. I think this is cool. As someone who just loves computing technology and the idea of putting computers everywhere, I think this is really interesting.
And I think a lot more people now are starting to come to the realization that, oh yeah, Chrome OS is a big deal and it is a threat. Because Microsoft absolutely sees that internally. They see the data, they see the numbers. Chrome OS is picking up steam in all the markets Microsoft wants to be in, education being the primary one there. So they need to combat that. And I know people say, "Oh yeah, but Chrome OS isn't in use anywhere but America." So what? That doesn't mean anything. Like the iPhone is also the most popular phone in America, but that doesn't mean it isn't popular elsewhere in the world. Chrome OS could pick up everywhere, then Microsoft would be screwed. So they need to compete in these markets, and they need to compete well. Windows 10s was a terrible example. And it was a half-assed.
It was a Band-Aid. Yeah. I mean, we said it when it came out that this is a Band-Aid for what they eventually want to get to, which is a more secure operating system. But you're not going to do that with current Windows 10.
Yeah, you can't. You cannot. And again, like I said, a lot of people also drawing similarities between Windows 10s and Santorini. They're very different. You'll see that when they announce it. It doesn't even, the experience is entirely different. It's entirely fluid. It actually I think, what a lot of people see when they see Santorini, they'll go, "Oh, I actually want to use that. I don't want to use because Windows 10s, it's Windows 10, but with a lock on it. It's like I could just use normal Windows. All the stuff to run it is there in the background. I just can't do it now. But with Windows Santorini, it's like, oh, it's actually lightweight. It's true to what it's trying to commit to." And there are benefits in doing that, like the super fast updatability. It should be amazing on battery life, especially in Windows 10 and ARM devices, always connected, and just smooth and fluid thanks to C Shell and Fluent Design, and the fact that a lot of those legacy features and components have been gutted. Everything just sort of comes together and works nicely.
And now, and when you bring in things like, let's look at what Microsoft has to offer on this device out of the box, right? So you get Skype, you get OneNote, you get full Office, you only get Edge, which will be based on Chrome. So you're going to have all your plugins and abilities and compatibility there. So that is solved. You can also make that as part of the core experience for doing a lot of making up for stuff for apps. So you have the PWA story, which is coming along with Twitter and Hulu now. You already have Netflix, Hulu, Sling. You have what for music? Oh, what's the name of it? Spotify. I don't know. I'm looking at the icon here. You have Spotify for streaming music. Like, what else? What else does Microsoft? You have To Do. You have all of their core apps. If you think about what people actually use like light computing devices for, Microsoft has Teams, of course, Slack you can install. That has all that stuff sort of ready. In that system, and it scales beautifully across things. I don't know. For me, this is like the ideal kind of device that I'm really looking forward to.
2 seconds. Keep talking, Dan.
Oh, someone's got a parcel coming. But this concept of like light computing, I think is super important. Now, it doesn't matter, for a lot of people in our audience, they're going to like, well, I need Windows 10 Classic, which is going to continue to exist. We'll get updates. Will be an insider program. All that will be there. But you're going to see these sort of like new devices come out with new experiences. And I think for a lot of people, at least, they're going to be interested in it. the Chrome OS angle is really interesting only because Google was able to sort of control the whole narrative there. They control a lot of the web in terms of uh, how Chrome interacts for website design. And it's because of Chrome that a lot of people use on a desktop a browser now instead of an app. And so they've just leveraged that for Chrome OS, which I still don't love, but it's getting there. Just like how Android started off pretty terrible too, at least for the first 4 versions, was not very good, especially compared to iOS. Now you look at Android 9, Android 9 is pretty solid. Like they fixed a lot of their issues. And so I don't know. The world is changing for computing.
And
then on the other end, in the other end, we got Quantum, which is just like a whole other thing. So,
yeah, Quantum runs legacy Windows.
Speaking of, it does have enough power. Speaking of Chrome, what's going on with Timeline here? The official plugin, I believe.
Yeah, weirdly enough, and this sort of just went under the radar for a few days before someone pointed it out to me. Microsoft released an official Timeline extension for Google Chrome, and only Google Chrome. They said it was in response to feedback where Chrome users were complaining that Timeline didn't work with it, and Google hasn't added native support themselves. So Microsoft just built an extension that users can go download, which brings Chrome activities to the Timeline UI, which is kind of nice. So it works just like Edge now. I think it's kind of cool. So most people on Windows use Chrome, I think is fair to say. And now those people can actually take advantage of Timeline more than just seeing a Word document or two. Because, I think you and me both use Edge, Dan. For us, Timeline is basically 99% web pages, right? And then sometimes you see a Word document that pops up or an image you looked at.
MyTube does work with it as well.
Yeah, there were definitely a few third-party ones that do work with it, which is nice to see. Excuse me. But now Chrome works with it as well.
I love Timeline. Timeline's like, I think, my favorite features. And I talked about this in the past. The way I use it, it's very good for that. I use the search feature all the time. When I read an article 3 days ago, and I forgot, who wrote it, the title of it, but I remember like a keyword, like the topic. I just typed that in, and it sorts through and goes, oh, here it is, and that's my article. That's like super useful. I also really like using it on Android. I think it's just great while I'm out and about. I'm like, I can do the same thing. So
I think a lot of people don't find it useful for some reason. I know I kind of don't. Like, it's like, I don't know. I just find clicking into it is more hassle than just if Cortana pops it up to me contextually, like Microsoft has been planning to do forever. Come on, Microsoft.
Yeah. It's funny, actually. I will say, and you talked about this on your walkthrough video for the new Windows 10 Spring update, how Cortana is separated now. They took it out, and it's like we caught them moving, mid-move, like with all their stuff on the street. And so Cortana is just kind of like there, out of place. And we know Cortana is supposed to be integrated eventually probably into the Action Center or something a little bit more elegant. But because of the way it is now, I'm turning off Cortana. It takes up space in my taskbar, which is already crowded.
So you're saying Cortana's dead?
I'm not saying Cortana is dead. I'm saying that the solution for the spring update and what they did with it annoys me.
Yeah, I last week's episode, I finished it with a rant where I basically said they've really messed this experience up. And I did tweet a few weeks ago, and I was just sort of half snarkily. It was like, could you imagine if Microsoft ships 19H1 with Cortana in this state? And people were responding, like, they're going to do that. And I'm like, yeah, they are. And I think at this point, they definitely are. I don't think there's any time to change it. I really, 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 really hope... excuse me, I'm still quite ill, if you couldn't tell. I really hope they go ahead and do the whole Cortana in the Action Center thing. I think it just makes so much more sense there in the system tray, in the Action Center.
I'm afraid, just like the My People thing. I mean, we've talked about this again, that Cortana conceptually is shifting for them, but the stuff that powers Cortana is AI, machine learning, is like very important to these concepts of future computing for them. There will be like an AI. I'd be actually really curious if you can dig up anything on this about Santorini and Cortana's role in that, because I would imagine that as an assistant, it would play a bigger role in terms of machine learning and prompting you and being more proactive. Like, this would be the opportunity to sort of make the OS more reliant on it. But have you heard anything about that?
No, it's the only things in all of the Windows Lite docs and images I've seen, images I've seen, haven't seen Cortana at all. At the same time, I also haven't seen an action center, which apparently it does have. So maybe it's in there. We'll have to see. And again, also I've seen lots of early stuff. Again, it's nowhere near shipping, so maybe they still need to add that, or maybe Cortana's just going to be an app on Windows Lite at Santorini instead, which could make sense as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would, again, if you're designing an OS, modular, ground up, fluent design, brand new for future light computing systems, and you had a choice for Cortana, they would absolutely, I would think, try to make that as a modular system, because there'd be some markets where Cortana doesn't really do much, so why have it? And they could pull it out for those markets and those releases. Whereas here in the bright, shiny United States, we could have Cortana. My fear is with the spring update, people are going to see this thing on the taskbar. They're going to hit it. It's going to look kind of gross. It's going to take up room, because we all know a lot of people use the taskbar as a start menu. Yeah. And they're going to be like me. They're going to right click and they're going to hide Cortana. And then they're going to see Cortana usage drop. And they're going to be like, see, no one's using Cortana. Yeah. Just like the My People thing. And it becomes a self-fulfilling, so it's such a terrible way to sort of, half-ass Cortana at this point. Pardon my language, but yeah. if we don't think they're getting rid of it, at the same time, the way they're
it does seem like they're sort of trying to shove it out the door, right? It's like we just don't care anymore. That's the attitude I get from Microsoft when it comes to Cortana, and it's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? It's like there's rumors of like an actual Cortana device you're working on. The Surface headphones just shipped at $350, and they come with Cortana, and they're basically an entirely Cortana-based experience. What is going on, Microsoft? I think this is just the result of so many different teams putting code into Windows that they can't all talk to each other. I'm sure. I imagine people working on Cortana would love to get that moved into the Action Center at this point. But I bet it's the Action Center people who are like, we're a bit busy doing other things.
And it's weird, too, because if you use Windows Mixed Reality and, like you and I, not everybody can do this, but HoloLens, Cortana has a big role on those devices.
Same with just mixed reality headsets, right? The whole setup experience.
The whole initial experience, the out-of-box experience is Cortana training you, walking you through it. On HoloLens, like you're using, it's cool too. I think on the 1809 update for HoloLens, you could just say Cortana now. You don't have to say, hey, Cortana. Nice. But it's like it makes so much sense on that system, because it's just like I could just, ask her to do things instead of, because the interaction model on holograms is a little bit, you don't have a keyboard necessarily or controller in front of you. So having a voice assistant do stuff is actually very, very useful. But Microsoft, if you're listening, I know you are, at Build, could you please just say something about Cortana? Like either, I guess if they don't say anything, I feel like Cortana then is definitely maybe being shown out the door. However, this would be an opportunity. If they're going to talk about Santorini, I would really, really like to hear something about machine learning, AI, Cortana, and how they envision, and now just turned on my computer, how they envision this digital assistant in future computing models. I'd be really interested in that. So
yeah. Before we carry on quick, I do want to talk about Windows Sets quickly, because I have said this before. Windows Sets is supposedly going to be a big part of Santorini. And in some of the stuff I've seen recently, I saw some updated. This wasn't live code, I don't think. So, this may not actually come. But the idea is that obviously you get your window with all the tabs along the top, and they can be web pages or programs, whatever you want. But in the taskbar, in the hybrid taskbar thing, that's sort of in the middle. Those same sort of apps that are grouped together onto one set also get grouped together in the taskbar. So it's, instead of those programs being all different. In different places, depending on what order you open them and stuff, they all get grouped together under one big button, and with all those icons together, you click on it and it just brings up that window. That makes so much more sense, I think. If it's visually grouped in the taskbar, I think people actually understand that a bit more. So, these are groups. That's basically all they are. Sets being sort of advertised as a tab-based interface, I think, is misleading for a lot of people. It's just groups. You group apps together. That's what it is. And I think doing that in the taskbar is a great idea, and hopefully Microsoft actually ships that, because I looked at that and went, that makes so much more sense. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, no, it's there's a lot of opportunity here for Santorini, so hopefully we'll hear more about it, at Build, and they'll actually talk about Windows. That'd be kind of neat. What else have we got here? Oh, HoloLens eye tracking. Real quickly, as we're talking about HoloLens, so a new patent was discovered this week, filed. I think it was on February 19th, and basically outlines a system of eye tracking that doesn't zap the CPU heavily and has some new abilities. You can go check that out. Windows Central, we did a quick write-up on it. I feel like eye tracking is a shoo-in for a HoloLens too. Like it kind of has to be. They've done a lot of work already in Windows. We talked about this last week with this, already having eye tracking native to the operating system. So they're very familiar with it. But as an interaction model for wearing a headset, there's already gaze. So there's already eye tracking, like where you're looking at. But this apparently would be more sophisticated. I think it'd be a lot easier for typing and clicking and all this kind of stuff. So, HoloLens 2, we're expecting Windows 10 on ARM. So this thing will be probably powered by the Snapdragon 850 processor, not the 8CX. But considering we're running, what is it? Intel Atom processor right now, which is just huge. But it handles,
it's not terrible.
Yeah,
that's the beauty
slow
of
on the updates.
That's the beauty of the old mobile core platform that Windows 10 Mobile and HoloLens were based off. It was so lightweight.
But now with ARM, new architecture, new OASIS, it'll be interesting to see how the UI looks. But yeah, we're expecting wider field of vision. It's been 4 years. I'm pretty positive. And that was like the number one complaint from day one. So, 4 years of technology, I'm sure they're able to. I think this is going to be like a really big kind of like wow moment, right? This thing will be lighter, it'll be smaller, 4G LTE, wider field of vision on there, some more sophisticated eye tracking. I guarantee you'll have better voice and AI assistance with it. It's just going to get better battery life. It'll probably be cheaper too, I'll imagine. This could be like a really interesting device. Now, there's still a lot of question about how they're going to position this. HoloLens is, a lot of people tell me, oh, HoloLens, it's a failure. They missed it. I don't know what they're talking about. Like HoloLens is doing something that Apple hasn't been able to do, and same with Android, which is it's actually selling devices, $3,000 devices, to major institutions and companies and factories and the military. And it's actually being used by industry. And that's not, no one's using Apple ARKit in industry right now. And Apple ARKit, I believe that's the name of it too. It's been a while since I said it, but it's neat. But when was the last time you saw someone with an iPhone using this, like in the real world, right? I think this stuff is like wearables. It's still going to be a while to figure out, but I think Microsoft is so far ahead. The thing is, when I put on my HoloLens today and I was using it, and I hadn't used it in a while, we've mentioned this before. It's not a device you just put on every morning for multiple reasons, but still, like, it blows my mind that 4 years ago they made this thing. Because when you see the holograms in the start menu and you launch apps and stuff's floating around, it's freaking crazy. Like, it's done so well. And same with Windows Mixed Reality. If you're in a country that supports it, I still highly recommend trying it at least, because Windows Mixed Reality just runs so well. It's like they've already created this sort of 3D hologramish virtual reality version of Windows and computing. It's already here. It's like they're so far ahead of Apple and Android on this stuff. Not saying that those guys can't catch up or do something really interesting. I think they definitely could. I'm just saying that Microsoft's done so much groundwork already on this stuff. It's really kind of insane. Even using a 4-year-old headset now, I'm still blown away by the technology. So whatever HoloLens 2 is going to be like with this new OS and everything they've done so far, like higher resolution, I'm sure the holograms are going to look better. I don't know. This is really interesting. I don't necessarily think this will be the consumer version, that our audience is going to just go out and buy for Christmas. I think this will be closer to that. I think the price will be cheaper. It reminds me of the new Nikes, the ones that self-lace up. This is the second version they're on now. The first ones, I think, were like $750. It's like, come on. The new versions are $350. It's like, that's still stupid expensive, but that's in that range now where you're like, that's okay. Maybe I could really splurge. But they cut the price in half in 2 years, right? So that's the ability of technology. That means, another 2-3 years, there'll be $180 Nikes at self-lace, right?
Yeah. I do wonder if it'll be cheaper than the Galaxy Fold.
Yeah, right. The Galaxy Fold, $2,000, starting at $2,000 now. Nothing against Samsung here. I think people are excited about it, but a lot of people are scratching their heads because, as far as we know, they haven't even demonstrated pen support. And I've always said that I've been saying for a while, is the dual screen experience is going to really be based on the software experience, not so much the hardware. I feel like Huawei is about to announce a foldable phone too. So I feel like the hardware is something that a lot of companies can kind of do.
I mean, I think there are limitations and to doing a single screened foldable device, which is what the Galaxy Fold is. Which, for those who don't know, Samsung announced its foldable phone this week, and it looks pretty cool. It's very expensive, like Dad said, $2,000. Which, to be honest, I'm not entirely blown away by. When we were talking about Andromeda, we were always saying it's going to be an expensive device. There was no way that was going to ship for less than $1,000, because why would it? It's not. If the iPhone 10 costs $1,000 and it has one screen, what about an iPhone 10 with two screens? It's like
it makes sense.
Yeah,
the screen is one of the most expensive components.
These are going to be expensive devices, and we've made this argument before with the Galaxy Fold. And the Andromeda. Andromeda was doing this form factor, but with two screens that joined together with a sort of hinge mechanism. So it wasn't one screen, but that allowed it so it could fold outwards. So how the Galaxy Fold does it is when you use it when it's closed, it has like a tiny 4.3 screen on the outside, which looks stupid. And then you fold it out and it has a bigger screen on the inside. Whereas Andromeda, if you wanted to use the screens on the outside, you could just fold it all the way 180 degrees and those screens would then click in outside. And you could have just a normal phone based using that same screen that you'd be using when it was open like a book. I think that's a way better idea, and it also allows you to keep using glass for the screens, which feels way more premium than the plastic or whatever it is they're using on the Galaxy Fold, because again, glass doesn't bend like that, just not at will. You do have to find a material that isn't glass to support that, and no matter what you find, it isn't going to be as nice feeling as glass, especially for pen input, right? So yeah, I think there are a lot of more advantages doing what Microsoft's doing with Andromeda than what Samsung's going for with the Galaxy Fold.
And ultimately, the problem with Android is it's reliant on Google. Now, Google has committed to saying that they're going to focus on dual screen, making the OS dual screen compatible and optimize apps and experiences around that. So that's super important. But Android runs into this problem, which is what the problem existed for Android tablets for years too, which was at a certain screen size, you start like, why am I using this and not like a PC? And so the idea of like a foldable Android device is interesting up to a point where it's like, all right, what am I doing on this thing? Like, what does it do that's so different than my phone? And that's still a question that needs to be answered. I get it's bigger. As someone who carries a 7.2-inch phone around, like, I get having a nice display is really nice. I'm not sure in of itself that's the selling point, right? And I feel like Microsoft's approach, even though they never, publicly even talked about this, but from what we've seen internally, was creating a new experience that utilizes dual screens in a familiar way, like a notebook, like this, something that basically emulating that's already out there. What I see with the Galaxy Fold so far, it's sort of like, it's Android, but bigger. It's like, okay, I mean, that's cool. Is that $2,000 cool? I don't know. My 7.2, so that's a 7.3-inch display. I have a 7.2-inch display, although probably not as wide. But it costs like $830, and I consider it the best phone on the market right now. So it's like, do I need to double that price for? I don't know. But it's interesting. And speaking of Huawei, they're about to apparently announce their own foldable device too that looks to be different. So this stuff's going to happen for a while. It's going to be interesting. I'm not trying to, be negative on it. I'm just saying that just because you're first to market on this stuff doesn't mean that's the winner. Going back to smartphones, Trio, BlackBerry, Windows Mobile, Nokia. Those were all out there way before the iPhone and Android came out. Where are those guys now, right? So it's like, just because you're first, and even Nokia had was it like 80% of the smartphone market like in 2006 or something like that? It was ridiculous. And now it's like, meh.
Yeah. What was I going to say about foldables? Literally, it was on the top of my tongue. Now I've lost it. God damn it. What was it? I've lost it. Never mind. It was important as well.
Language, Zach. Language.
Sorry. Is that a swear word? I apologize.
To some it is.
Crazy. Okay. I'm trying to think what it was. Keep talking, Dan.
Well, anyway, I think the foldable market's going to be real interesting. Obviously, it was funny because we brought this up like 2 years ago, talking about foldables. People thought it was a dumb idea. And here we are. Now everybody's like, oh, foldables. And now, there's patents from Apple apparently showing what a...
There you go. I remembered what I was going to say.
Okay.
You said Apple. It was about Apple. I was going to say, and I hate to say it, I feel like Apple is most appropriately positioned to do a foldable phone because they have the iPhone, which is pretty great,
And an iPad.
and they have an iPad, right? So they could just fold it out into an iPad, and it would just run iPad apps. They could call it the iPad phone. It'd be amazing. And because
Self-fulfilling prophecy. So that's basically what we call the iPhone Max, the 10.
I think that would be, because that could be the new iPad Mini, right? It could just be an iPhone that folds out. But I don't think Apple are anywhere near releasing a foldable thing yet.
Right. And that's what I want to see Microsoft. I think Microsoft's approach is just different, right? It's not coming from a phone that's just a bigger screen now. It's coming from this idea of like, here's a digital notebook with a pen focused, and it's going to be about swapping information and note taking and all this kind of stuff. And listen, I love my Mate 20X, and I have the pen for it. It's not a great inking experience. Like, I mean, it's all right, but this is again where you see Microsoft is just way ahead on this stuff. Like Windows 10 has a lot of inking support. Again, going to something like what for Santorini, I imagine inking is going to be a massive part of it. Again, built from the ground up, all interaction models will rely on the pen kind of thing, or as an option. I just feel like Microsoft has more grounding on this stuff, but they do eventually have to release a device, so we can't just keep talking off Microsoft here. Like they do need to have this actually come out sometime. If it's going to be 2-3 years from now, that could be a problem, right? Because then that market is a lot more mature than it is today.
Well, I think we'll see Centaurus PCs next year, which aren't mobile devices, but they're still foldable, which should be a good kickstart into that ecosystem at least. And then from there, they can just shrink it down. Which I think is a better way of going about this, especially as a platform that doesn't really have much of an ecosystem for a mobile device. Because if if Santorini takes off and is actually popular, then developers will want to build for it, and then Microsoft can just shrink it down. That's kind of how they could go about it.
And at that point, PWA will be, much bigger. Like I'm still endorsing Twitter and the Hulu app. I think are amazing examples of what PWA is capable of doing. I'm more than fine with seeing other companies make apps like that in the future. In fact, I love it. Like I love the Hulu app for me has been fantastic. I just love everything about it.
I like the Twitter PWA a lot. It's very nice. I didn't know this. You could add like the PWA on iOS to the home screen, and it actually launches as like a Chromeless app thing, which is really nice. iOS started supporting PWA, at least in a I don't know if they've updated. They weren't supporting all the features of what makes a PWA, just some of them. But long story short, Apple's getting on board with this too. I mean, it makes sense for a lot of reasons that we've talked about in the past. Yeah, but I think Twitter definitely wants to be one of the first companies who just has a PWA for all of the platforms, because building different apps for Android.
They killed their app for the Mac.
They did kill the app for the Mac, and they killed the app for Windows, and they killed it. I haven't killed it on Android or iOS yet, but there is something called Twitter Lite on Android, which is the PWA, but for Android, which you can download from the Play Store. I think it's only available in India, though, for now. And iOS is still using iOS app. But I totally foresee a future where Twitter just replaces all of them with a PWA because it's easier.
Sure. Oh, yeah, it's cheaper. I mean, that is the long-term goal, and I see a lot of companies going down this route. What I liked about Hulu was it shows you could do streaming media and have it Chromeless and still look really nice. So,
and I think a good PWA, which is totally possible, by the way, a good PWA, you can't tell the difference. I mean, you and I could tell the difference, or maybe I could tell the difference.
I don't know. The Hulu app to me, like, it just feels like an app. Like I really could not. I only know it's PWA because Hulu actually confirmed it's a PWA, but right. I really could not tell the difference.
Well, fair enough then. Yeah, if you can do it as good as that, then what's the problem, right? I think that's amazing.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that wraps up. You got to get going, and we're coming up just shy of an hour. That's good enough, I think. I got to start packing my clothes because I always get so nervous and stressed out when I have to fly, I don't know, a couple thousand miles across the ocean to a foreign country that I don't speak their language.
All of your friends are already there. Don't worry about it.
That's true. Although I'm staying in my own place because, that's how I roll. But pay attention to Windows Central. If you're listening to this live, the Microsoft announcement is live streamed. We already have it up on Windows Central, so you can watch it live. So don't worry about it. You can see all the HoloLens 2-ness that we're expecting to be announced there. And then follow up on Monday. I'll probably have an actual I expect to have a hands-on experience. I don't know if I'll be able to film it but I'll talk about it. So I'll probably we have Mark Wim there, so we'll probably shoot a video about it. So make sure you pay attention to that. And we'll see what actually comes of this, but it should be very exciting. We'll be back next week as well for the podcast. So we'll do Q&A then. So sorry, we're not doing Q&A this week. We're just going to head out. But as always, we appreciate you guys tuning in live. Listen to us on mixer.com/Windows Central. You can also watch the past episodes there. We're also on our YouTube channel, which we're there. But as always, thank you everyone for listening in. We'll talk to you later. Take care, everyone.
Cool. So yes, sorry guys, we will be heading off now. No Q&A this week. If you have questions, do tweet us and I'll answer them over the weekend. I just cannot hang around now. I have to go and be places. But yes, as Dan said, we'll be back next week as well. And HoloLens 2 will be on the agenda. I think it'll be a HoloLens 2 special next week, right? I don't think anything else will happen.
Yeah, there'll be a lot of questions, I'm sure,
yeah,
that people want to know about.
Great. Anyway, thank you very much for tuning in, guys. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.